Hi there web devs, Zach Brady here from the Reactionary.net, and I'm here again to speak with you in a few minutes about another React.js topic. This time we're going to be talking about presentation components and container components and how they're going to be able to stop you from distributing the complexity of your application all over the place. So let's get started.
The Reactionary.net, here to help you learn about React.js. Everyone from experts to novices, we're here to help you develop your knowledge. Let Zach Brady show you how to learn the ins and outs of React now.
So presentation components and container components in a nutshell. I mean, essentially, you could say that a presentation component is stateless and a container component is stateful. And the reason that we do this is simply to cut complexity, because it tends to be that if you don't try and tease apart your components in this way, that you end up distributing the complexity of your application across a number of different components. So let's try and learn this through example. What you'll see here on the screen is the Hello World application that we built in the previous video. I'll put a card up for that, and if you happen to be following along with that, then you know you should already have this. If you aren't, then there is a Github Repo that you can pick up. I'll put a link for that in the description. And at the moment, what you're looking at here is the part 1 branch of that Github Repo. So at the moment I have the node server running, and the application is here on my other screen. So this is the Hello World here. So let's flick over to the part 1.1 branch. You can see I've done that previously. Okay, and so this is the application as it stands in the 1.1 branch. And if we have a look at the application running here, you can see that we've got a little bootstrap box here, a bootstrap button and a display, and when we hit roll, it randomly picks a whole heap of numbers and then lands on 1. And now, yeah, that's between 1 and 20, so this is a D20. And it's got the ability to be able to stop it so you can't keep on rolling them and stuff like that. So if we break this screen apart into different components, you could say that this button here would be a component, and this display here would be a component, and then you would have an app component, and that is in fact how we've architected how I've architected the application here. So if we have a look at the app component here, now this looks like a lot of code, so maybe if I'll just reduce this a little bit, and I'll also bring the screen across so there's a bit more to look at. So you can see it's still a fairly simple component, but this is my container component. So this is my stateful component, so it has state. So in the constructor, you can see that I'm setting up the state here. So I've got a die result and an is rolling. So the is rolling is just what handles all the ability to be able to gray out the button and all that kind of stuff, so that the application knows that there's currently a roll going on. And then we've got a timer which holds the set timeout for being able to actually do the rolls. And then these are a couple of local variables, which once again are involved in different aspects of doing the roll. I mean, as I say, this is in a GitHub repo, so if you want to pull this apart and work out how it's working, then you can go ahead. I'll try not to be so explicit in how exactly this works. We've got a do roll that is just the, let's start rolling sort of function. We've got a new die result here, which is well, let's have a quick look here. So this is the callback that gets used. So when you execute the roll here, you can see that we've got the roll timer, we've got set timeout, and it calls get new die result. So this gets called every roll speed, which is set to 100 milliseconds. So this is the actual callback for each time that the application goes to pick another number. And so you can see here that all these functions are all interested in keeping state, changing state, and all that. Now, if we have a look at the render here, the render is actually quite simple, and this is something that is sort of inherent in container components, because container components shouldn't they shouldn't be concerning themselves with the presentation of the data. So it farms that off to other components. So we've got a panel here, which is the bootstrap, the React Bootstrap panel. I'd been convinced by some other viewers that this React Bootstrap is a good way to go for putting together applications. I'm still not sure if I agree or not, but I'm at least testing it out. So that's what that is anyway. These are my components here, the roller display and the roller button. So this is a container component. So let's have a look at the presentation component. So if I go into the roller display to begin with, and you can see that this is a very terse component here. We're using a stateless functional component in order to be able to define the component here, and this is something that quite often happens with presentation components. Because they don't handle state, they can be very, very simple, and it means that you've got lots of little building blocks in order to be able to build your application. So this is a nice offshoot of the presentation and container component pattern. And so this simply just makes a div. It couldn't get easier than that. And then we've got the roll button, which just does a bootstrap button. And once again, these couldn't get simpler, but it's because the application's so simple. So you can see then that a container component holds state, a presentation component shows that state, and you try and draw a line down the middle, and they both only do that. And in that way, the presentation components stay simple, and the container components only are your single source of truth for state and modifying that state. So I've gone ahead and taken the liberty of checking out the part 2 branch now. The reason I've done that is because I wanted to be able to show you a little bit more of a complex example around how container components and presentation components start scaling a little bit. So I've added a little bit to the application, and you can see here that now we have this box where we can define a number of sides, and we can add a new die, and you can see now that I've created a 1D100, and I can go ahead and roll, and that gives me a 1D100 roll, but I've still got my 1D20 here that I can do, or I can make more D20s and roll them all at the same time. So you can see now that so this is our original, this used to be our entire app, but now it would seem that this is now just a component within a list component. This appears to be a component in and of itself, and then we've got an application that holds the whole lot of this. So how is this translated in terms of presentation and container components? The interesting thing that we should start with here is, let's have a look at the roll button and roll display. You'll remember that these were previously presentation components, they were SFCs, and they haven't changed. And so despite the fact that our application has gone through a large amount of evolution comparative to its size, the presentation components have remained the same, and that is kind of a cool win that you get out of this this pattern, because the presentation components just take state from, and they don't really care where they take it from, or I mean, obviously the format needs to be a certain way, but they don't care about which components they take this state from. They just take values and display them, and that's their lot in life. So let's have a look at the app.js. You can see that this has changed quite a bit. It's quite a bit simpler. All we've got now is the add die callback, and you can see that we've got state here, which is holding an array of dice. So you can see our D20 is there to begin with, and then we send the state, so the dice list, down to the die list component, and we send the add die callback to the die creator component. And this demonstrates the fact that you don't just have to have container components talking to presentation components. You can have container components speaking to other container components as well. And in that way, the certain container components deal with the state that is applicable to them. So if we have a look at the die list, and now this actually is a presentation component, so what I've just said isn't applicable in that instance, but it passes down to a presentation component which just displays the state that it gets passed to as a it maps the array to different die components. Now, you could make the argument that this maybe is an abstraction too far, and that you could pull this back up into the app.js, but it was more just, I've just sort of done it for demonstration purposes to kind of show that you can like, container components don't necessarily have to just talk to presentation components, even though they most often do. So if we have a look at the die component real quick, this should be familiar, because this is what the app.js used to look like. And then if we have a look at the die creator, this is an interesting one as well, because you can see that we have state here. This is a container component, and we've got a few callbacks and that kind of stuff, but then we don't have any of our own components lower than this. So it would kind of appear that this is kind of a mismatch of presentation and container components, but I would argue that that isn't the case, because even though we're using third-party components here, this is still essentially the same thing as what we've been doing in our other container components. So that was presentation components and container components in a few minutes. I wrote a blog post about presentation components and container components on the reactionary.net, and I'll put a link for that in the description, so if you want to do any further reading, then that's there for you. But I hope you enjoyed learning the ins and outs of React with me, and I look forward to speaking with you in the next In a Few Minutes video. Take care.
Let's act ready.